Funding for the Viewfinder series is provided by Allied Insurance. Life comes at you fast. Allied provides insurance for auto, home, business, and farm. Allied Insurance, a nationwide company, on your side.
Funding for the Viewfinder series provided by SAFE, supporting programs of great interest to the people of Sacramento, and for over 60 years, looking out for your best interest as well. SAFE Credit Union.
Funding for this production was made possible by the Cortopassi Family Foundation. December 8th, 1941. It was the day after Pearl Harbor, and the United States declared war on Japan. Across the nation, everyday people were about to alter their lives for the good of the country. While everyone played a part, there were some cities that contributed more than anyone could have imagined. In 1941, Stockton, California was a small town, home to about 50,000 people. But for a town this size, their sacrifice and role in the war rivaled that of any city in the country. This is the story of how a small town, with its unique location and generous people, made it possible to provide an extraordinary contribution. In a city best known for its port, it may come as a surprise to learn what Stockton contributed to the skies. Between 1940 through 45, Stockton Airfield was home to the Army's Advanced Flying School of the Western Flying Training Command. It's here where thousands of pilots train for combat.
By the time they graduated their last class in March of 1945, they were cranking out 200 pilots every 8 weeks. And probably the greatest notoriety that these pilots won for not only the facility, but obviously for themselves as well, is in Jimmy Doolittle's early 1942 raid over Tokyo. Out of the 36 pilots involved, 11 had trained here at Stockton Field.
The war brought countless men together, and circumstances put them in positions where their lives depended on each other. But more than half a century later, in a hangar at Stockton Field that's filled with memories, the flyers from the World War II Warbird group come together simply as friends.
And those guys are so close. You can tell it among them. When they get together, they start talking.
This day is special for the group, sort of a flight back in time, because for most of them, this will be the first time in more than 60 years they've flown on a World War II-era plane. The Warbirds are primarily a mix of pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and gunners who served during World War II. One after another, the men have incredible stories of service. Take Hal Johnson. He was the pilot of the Flying Fortress Little Patches, named for the bullet and flak holes the plane endured.
I'm a very proud man. I would go around telling people, you know, I was in the 91st Bomb Group.
Martin Sasser was a tail gunner on a B-17.
We were the first group in B-17 to fly Berlin and come back.
There's Doug Erickson, a recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross. He once repaired battle damage to his plane while in flight, saving himself and the entire crew. And on top of that, he voluntarily doubled the service time his country asked of him.
I served one tour, 2 years over in the South Pacific and Asia. Came back and volunteered to go over Europe and served a tour there. My squadron flew 3 missions on D-Day.
Doug, along with the other Warbirds, have memories they'll never forget. But in the years following the war, most veterans kept their memories to themselves. Stories of what they saw were left on the battlefield. But John Skippers helped bring the Warbirds together so lessons wouldn't be lost and friends not forgotten.
My oldest brother was killed in a B-24 crash in the Philippines on a 27th mission. There's a lot of stories out there that nobody knows about, and they won't be told to anybody unless somebody asks. And so we said, well, let's start a group, if we can, of guys, and we'll tell our stories. And we did.
The warbirds have met regularly since 1983, and for the past few years they've assembled at Ty Ramey's hangar at Stockton Field. The son of a World War II pilot himself, he appreciates what the veterans gave and wanted to give something in return.
I heard about the World War II Warbird group and went out to a couple of their meetings. We had a little museum hangar set up with a bunch of old, World War II stuff, and I told them I'd be honored if they'd consider having a meeting in the hangar. So they ended up just coming over to our hangar and have been there ever since. It's a real honor to be able to work with these guys. I mean, they truly are, from our greatest generation.
Ty also owns the World War II era twin beach the guys are flying in today. But after the plane ride, he put together something extra special. A chance to shoot the same weapon they fired from their plane 60 years ago. And understandably, there was a little rust.
Working.
Yeah, they are exciting. That's the first time, what, 62 years.
For the foreseeable future, the guys will continue enjoying their time together. But unfortunately, the group is getting smaller.
It's beginning to drop off because the guys are dying off. And we're down to about 90 now. And it's pretty sad. Just about every issue of the newsletter that I write an obituary for one of the guys. And it hurts.
So, in what may be their final mission together, they're compiling their stories into a book they've titled The Way It Was. It captures the stories of their missions and why they feel what they did was important.
I want future generations to know that there were those of us who were here at the time and that we did answer the call. And that probably changed the path of this nation, especially the freedom that I believe that our generation helped establish.
We learn from history, we always have, and I think that the people should know what's going on in the country if they're going to make informed decisions about the future. I'm proud to have served in World War II because I felt that this was the greatest country in the world.
To be able to contribute towards the health and welfare of this country is about the best thing you could possibly do.
The warbirds helped contribute to the war effort in the air, but the city is most famous for its contribution on the seas. Of the 4,600 ships built during the war, approximately 500 were made in Stockton, a good-sized number for a small-sized city. But Stockton's history with shipbuilding began much earlier.
Maritime traffic really made Stockton possible. Without its river-borne transportation, Stockton wouldn't have developed in the manner that it did.
And two brothers would become a catalyst for a new industry.
Stevens Brothers was founded by Thode and Roy Stevens. They built their first pleasure craft in 1902 and started to receive contracts and grew over the years.
They became world-renowned for their expert craftsmanship and beautiful wooden boats, and a Stevens boat is still highly coveted to this day. But in the years leading up to the war, companies like Stevens were coveted by the government for another reason. Minesweepers required wooden hulls.
When the War Department started to focus on different companies that could produce the vessels that they needed, they obviously wanted to go to those firms that had experience. And certainly Stevens Brothers had experience in building wooden boats. So in late 1940, Stevens Brothers and Kohlberg Brothers signed a joint agreement with the United States government to build 6 minesweepers.
Before the war, it took nearly 14 months to build a cargo ship. But in wartime, shipbuilders had to build that same ship in 8 weeks.
When you talked about, say, building a ship during World War I, you talked in terms of months. In World War II, you were talking about days.
To accomplish this, Stockton shipyards had to grow. But once the U.S. entered the war, workers were in short supply.
When you go from 2 shipbuilding firms in Stockton to 9, you obviously need workers.
During the war, we were 100% building for the service, and we only had one customer. We'd hire anybody that showed up.
They opened it up to unskilled men and eventually unskilled women.
There wasn't time to teach unskilled workers everything about shipbuilding, so the government cleverly developed training that taught a lot about one small part of the process.
By doing that and by having enough people to satisfy the demands for all those components, you were able to meet the demand to turn out the ships that were necessary.
Just as shipbuilders adapted, so too did the rest of Stockton. People learned to make more from less.
We had victory gardens. They gave us seeds to plant for home vegetables.
Shortages were common, but in most cases the city's businesses thrived. During the war, Marion and Paul Jacobs' parents owned a small grocery store near the shipyard.
It was called Jacobs Market, and we were located on West Fremont Street.
When Marion's mother saw workers buying items to make sandwiches, she decided to offer them pre-made instead. It was the beginning of a new business model in Stockton.
And I think that was the start of the first sort of cafe in a grocery store in Stockton, because I never knew of one that existed until Mama did that. And not that anybody welcomed the war, but I think the whole town basically prospered from the war experience without having to experience the tragedy of war.
Although the town prospered, many on the home front struggled to adapt in other ways. As new ships would leave the yard for battle, they took thousands of fathers and sons with them.
My father's name was Frank Andrew McEnany. Following the bombing in Hawaii, he was called up into active duty.
Lynn Livingston remembers those last days before her father shipped out. Together, they went to Stevens Brothers to collect a newly built minesweeper he would captain.
He must have thought it was very important to include me in that trip because I was only 4.
Although she vaguely remembers when her father left, she never knew a photo of that day existed. But inside Stockton's Hagen Museum, alongside thousands of letters and photos that document the city's role in the war, a photo was found, a picture of her father's ship leaving the Stockton shipyards.
Oh my, he must have been really excited. First big job.
A copy of that picture will now go alongside other memories of her father that she treasures.
My father died in 1967. I think he was a patriot, and these items remind me of him.
The Hagen Museum's archive is also home to countless other stories from the war, like the Jeep that became a legend.
Willie the Jeep is almost iconic for the people of Stockton. The students and the people of Stockton had scrap metal drives, they bought bonds, but Stockton put a unique spin to one of their efforts.
And that spin was arguably the most incredible fundraising effort in all the war. And it was led by kids from Stockton High School.
Most schools in the country, I believe, were urged to buy war bonds and stamps, war stamps, to help the war effort. But our school decided to use the money we raised to purchase Jeeps.
Willie was one of 275 Jeeps bought by the students at Stockton High. In 3 years, they raised nearly $250,000, more than $2.5 million in today's dollars.
In the Garden Tackle high school newspaper, we published a Jeepometer, and every week we published how many stamps purchased the Jeeps. So it was kind of fun to watch from the beginning to the end.
Each Jeep, the fleet of 275, was equipped with a small plaque on its dash.
This Jeep is one of a fleet presented to the United States Army by the students and faculty of Stockton High School, Stockton, California. Notice, Please report periodically the fate of this Jeep and return the plaque at the end of the war.
Well, over the years, beginning in 1942, letters started coming back. We have your Jeep. We have Jeep number 71. Your Jeep is a godsend. We really appreciate it.
Willie was allegedly captured by the Germans in Italy, recaptured by Allied forces in Holland, then it dropped from sight until it was found abandoned on a hillside near the Oklahoma-Texas border. After learning of the discovery, Stockton Middle School principal Arch Brown introduced the story to businessmen Tom and Bob McKeegan, who bought Willie and donated him to the city.
So we had a huge celebration. All the students from those classes got together and were able to look at Willie and sit in Willie and have pictures taken with Willie.
But Willie didn't come home with all his original parts intact.
Willie, when we got it in the late 70s, it looked fine for all intents and purposes, but the fact of the matter is it was kind of an automotive Frankenstein. It had parts from Jeeps in the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s.
So during restoration, to get Willie back to its original form, antique auto experts discovered Willie wasn't really a Willie. The Overland Company produced Willie Jeeps, but Ford made them as well. And turns out Willie was a Ford. Willie was given an honorable discharge from the U.S. Army, a first for an inanimate object, and now sits proudly restored at the Hagen Museum as the only Stockton Jeep to have ever made it home.
It's this personalization, this link between the soldiers in the field and the home front that we feel is so important, that really makes this a wonderful and very meaningful artifact here in the Hagen Museum for the people of Stockton.
Another continent, another Jeep. Only this one was called Honey Girl. Roy Briggs, a soldier stationed in Africa, named his World War II wheels after his bride Alice, the wife he left behind in Stockton.
The pure, unadulterated love between my grandparents. You know, my grandfather called my grandmother Honey Girl. There's a photograph of him in his Jeep, and his Jeep has stencil on the side Honey Girl, named after my grandmother.
And so it goes, a love story between a man and a woman, separated by war, but united by hundreds of letters across thousands of miles.
December 42. Alice, Honey Girl, your telegram arrived about 3 p.m. yesterday. Darling, it was wonderful of you to answer, and I'm very much relieved to know that you're there and things are okay at home. You must realize...
And these are their letters back and forth between each other.
Hello, dear. We're still getting your letters from Africa. Probably better than you get those that we write to you. I can't understand why you haven't received more than you say.
Stashed away in an old trunk housed in storage, slowly but surely, the correspondence between the couple came to life.
They came as part of a trunk that I inherited from my grandmother that just had kind of been in storage. And I had never really gone through the contents of it. I knew that it had my grandfather's uniform in it, but I had never really gone through the contents thoroughly. In her letters to him, she always signed them HG or Your Honey Girl.
Say hello to the others and take good care of yourself. All my love, HG, Honey Girl.
The letters not only document their love, they also detail the trials and tribulations of living through a world war. Against his wishes, Roy's honey girl Alice decided to enlist in the service. He got the news in a letter.
Despite my grandfather's pleading for her not to, she decided to join the WWII. I think he was worried that it would change her, that it would make her, you know, less womanly, you know, because it's funny because he talks in the letters of having met other members of the Women's Auxiliary Corps, and he says, and they're all kind of hard, and he didn't want that to happen to his honey girl. You read these letters, and he says it in every letter. He goes on at length about how much he cares for her and that she is his guiding light.
Now, Alice, my sweet, I'll say goodnight, sweetheart, and the old familiar I love you. Yours forever, Roy.
Bill Maxwell donated his grandparents' wartime letters to the Hagen Museum. The hope is to preserve them for an eternity and at the same time keep alive the love affair he uncovered between his grandfather Roy and his grandmother Alice, also known as Honey Girl. Letters were the single most important connection soldiers had to the home front. Troops romanced loved ones, but they also learned how Stockton as a community was rallying behind them.
Agriculture, almost from the city's inception, has been the driving economic force here. And so we had many people involved in agriculture in one way, shape, or form. And when the war came, and many of those individuals now found themselves in uniform, their positions had to be taken by other people. And so there were shortages, and these shortages were addressed in a number of ways. One of the most significant was the young people in Stockton High School were finding themselves out in the fields or in the local canneries.
Carolyn Mallett was a student at Stockton High School, the only high school in the city at the time.
School started at 7 or 7:30, I can't remember, and we went till about noon, and we took our own bag lunch, and we met in front of the school, and they loaded us for various farms. Nobody liked it, but we were glad to do it.
They knew that it was their part to play in the national war effort.
While students flooded the fields in the afternoons, canneries shifted into wartime mode as well. Tilly Lewis Foods was one of the largest canning companies in the country. The plant was run by this woman, Tilly Lewis, better known as the Tomato Queen of Stockton.
Tilly Lewis did provide sea rations to the military, and she did promote that so that people here in Stockton knew that by working in the fields, by working here at home, they were feeding their soldiers who are abroad.
Well, like most Americans following the United States entry into the war, the home front mobilized. Locally, a number of industries converted to a war footing.
To accommodate women who filled factory jobs vacated by enlisted men, Tilly Lewis, always an innovator and pioneer, opened a daycare for her new female employees.
She had, from her own background as a women's entrepreneur, she employed women ahead of time, and she had started programs such as daycare, and she had worked with many women who had never worked outside the home before. And when the wartime came around, she was prepared more than any other industry around here.
Stockton was seeing homegrown heroes emerge daily. The cause was pure. Support the troops risking their lives in the fight for freedom.
We were on picket duty off Okinawa in '45, and we were hit by a kamikaze.
Chet Locke lives in Stockton, and during the war he was an officer in the Navy. He was awarded the Navy Cross after his ship, the USS Hazelwood, was badly mangled by a suicide bomber.
We were attacked by, we think, 3, and one of them just missed us, and the other one got us, and it plowed into the bridge structure and killed all the deck officers.
Dozens of men, including the ship's captain, were killed. Chet was forced to take charge of the burials at sea.
But this gives you an idea of what it looks like for burial at sea.
Cheating death, sometimes daily, Chet relied more and more on letters from home.
Sometimes the mail would travel around trying to catch up with you because you're off here and you're off there, and finally you get together with the mail, and that's the high point of the sailor's existence, is having mail from home.
Chet was smitten with a young woman named Pat, a farmer's daughter from Petaluma. She caught his eye during a family function before he shipped out to sea.
If you were interested in this young lady, it was darned important, because you didn't want to roll over and play dead and not advance your cause. So you did your best, and I sure did. I tried my best to write good letters. USS Hazelwood, July the 20th, 1943. Dear Pat, how's the farmer's daughter these grand and glorious days? All I need for a lift in morale is one short glimpse of those laughing Irish eyes. I know she had plenty of boyfriends, and I had to do my best to top them. There was a young lady from Street Scott whose letters to me mean a lot. She writes with her pen with kind of a yen and slows up the Navy a knot. My love, Chet.
Chet and I, for some reason or other, had a special connection.
Riding back and forth, Chet officially began courting Pat when he returned home. A marriage proposal followed, and they've been together ever since.
We dated and we began to have so much fun together that there was no question. It didn't take any time at all to decide.
And it all started by putting pen to paper during some of the toughest times this country has seen.
It was almost like being with him. I'd get a letter say every week or so, and it was really, really good. It brought us close together, I think. Monday, October 2nd. Dear Chet, I just can't resist writing to you again tonight after your letter that came today. Chet, you're marvelous.
All these years later, who would have guessed these love letters would someday have major historical significance? But that's exactly what happened.
The letters had a function at the time they were written, and they have a function now. They were a link between the soldier and everything he knew and loved back home. And today, they provide a link with those of us who only have a faint memory of that period or have no knowledge whatsoever. They are a link to the past, and they were a link between the home front and the war front.
To order a DVD copy of this program, call 888-814-3923 or visit kvie.org/viewfinder.
Funding for this production was made possible by the Cortopassi Family Foundation.
Funding for the Viewfinder series is provided by Allied Insurance. Life comes at you fast. Allied provides insurance for auto, home, business, and farm. Allied Insurance, a nationwide company on your side.
Funding for the Viewfinder series provided by SAFE, supporting programs of great interest to the people of Sacramento, and for over 60 years, looking out for your best interest as well. SAFE Credit Union.